So the next segment we're going to be looking at is from MSNBC. So do take it at least with a grain of salt. But I do think that some of this stuff does need to be talked about. So let's go ahead and take a look. The topic at hand here is apparently the Trump administration wanting everybody infected. Because, you know.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. We want them infected.
That's a lead up.
Those are the words of a top Trump appointee directing the federal government to pursue an intentional strategy from the top down to get as many Americans as sick as possible in an attempt at so-called herd immunity. It's a strategy we have seen unfold before our eyes.
Now, isn't that interesting? Now, granted, again, do take this with a grain of salt. I have not sat down and researched the efficacy of the claims being made here, so just bear that in mind when we go and talk about this. But how many times have you personally, whether it was some conservative relative on Facebook or, you know, wherever you happen to be having these conversations, where you've heard somebody go, well, why doesn't everybody just get sick and then we'll develop herd immunity? Or if everybody should just get sick and get it over with. Ignoring the fact that, one, COVID has permanent damage, and two, there are people who have got it more than once. But, you know, everybody just getting sick that does not just suddenly make herd immunity good. That will just literally kill off your people who are immunocompromised. That's not how any of this works. But let's continue.
We've talked about it here on the show. It's been apparent to all of us reporting on this and watching. We now have the smoking gun evidence, emails obtained by Politico, in which the very people at the center of this say what exactly they were doing. That they wanted people to get the virus. And this is the result.
The result is literally hundreds of thousands of people dead in the United States. I know I'm smiling, and I shouldn't be, given the nature of this, but it is very telling how much a lot of people on the right don't tend to understand science very well when this is what you get. Now, granted, I am engaging in a hasty generalization. I'm saying a bunch of people on the right because I've seen a bunch of people on the right give this stupid argument. But it is still a hasty generalization. Don't use this as like a metric to say that, oh, everybody on the right's like this. They're not. There are people who legitimately understand science there. But there are enough of them who don't. We're talking about your call for an uprisings of the world or your fucking Ben Shapiro's of the world who think they do and then tend to say dumb stuff about trans rights. But let's continue on with the video itself. We're not going to just sit here and talk about how much people do or don't understand science. I know I don't understand it all that well, and I've done videos on it.
That's the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. last night. Its bell tolling 300 times, one ring of the bell for every 1,000 Americans, as we pass the 300,000 death toll.
That's a really fucking morbid way to go about that. Just ringing the cathedral bells for every 1,000 deaths. Now, it would be much more effective if you sat Trump just in front of that and just went, you have to listen to every one of these. But, yeah, no, that's fucked up.
According to the COVID tracking project, we lost another 3,400 Americans that have died since roughly when those bells rang just last night, and that is a new daily record. We've never seen it before. No country has. 3,400 Americans lost to the virus in just the last 24 hours.
Yep.
And it did not have to be this bad.
Well, no, it didn't. If from the beginning, and you can say anything in hindsight, you know, bear in mind, you could be like, oh, it was so obvious what to do the whole time. But we got to see in real time the things that actually cause a country to weather this virus and survive long enough to get to a vaccine safely. Social distancing, making sure that people are wearing masks, making sure that people are quarantining and staying indoors, and then the government providing enough assistance so that people can legitimately do so without issue. If I were not working at YouTube, with YouTube, quarantining would have meant that we would have lost our house. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Is it the right thing to do to quarantine? Yes. The asterisk on that is that the government has to be able to allow you the ability to function. If you don't work a stay-at-home job, then there needs to be some form of assistance in there to make sure that you actually can survive doing that. But instead, if what is being said in those emails is true, the strategy all along was not to provide care for American citizens to let them get through this, but was to actively kill enough American citizens that so that we would suddenly be strong enough to handle the virus on our own. But getting as many people infected as possible doesn't work with things like the flu, it doesn't work with things like the cold, and it doesn't work with things like polio. It's not going to fucking work with this. Getting everybody infected, to fight chickenpox, you don't just make everybody have chickenpox now. I don't know who thought that was a good idea, but if they were on any team responsible for any amount of shit to do during this whole COVID situation, they needed to be fired, and at this point, I'd probably say they need to be sent in fucking jail, but that's just me.
We have the world's worst aggregate death toll by far, and not because of our size. There are bigger countries like China and India, of course. No, the U.S. accounts for around 4% of the world's population, but we have nearly 19% of the world's COVID deaths.
Imagine that.
But
Just
the thing
imagine
to understand
that.
about that is it is not an accident, and it is not bungling. Donald Trump, as his administration, as backed by Republicans in his party, in Congress, explicitly pursued a strategy that would lead to more Americans getting sick and more Americans dying.
And again, there's going to be somebody, I'm sure, who's going to hop in the chat and explain, like I did earlier, that these are things being said in hindsight. But I want to tell you, again, yes, these are things being said in hindsight. These are things being said after looking back at the administration, seeing what it's done. But that has to be weighed against the fact that we understand viruses. We understand how they proliferate. We understand how they function. We understand a lot of basic principles where this is concerned. Because we understand those basic principles of how viruses work, of how they spread, we knew the measurements for COVID, we knew the measurements for the virus, we knew the measurements for the droplets that it was able to spread with. We knew enough to respond appropriately. And the Trump administration decided not to. Now, like I said in a previous segment, it is good, at least, that he recognizes that people are probably going to lock down again. And because of that, we need a stimulus bill that will actually help people get through that, not a measly $600. But a lot of that is too little too late. Even if he does effectively fight for a $2,000 stimulus bill, it's not going to uninfect my friends. It's not going to unkill family members who are dead now because of this. It's not going to undo things. It's a bit late for that. Really late for that. I like the Suris. This is actually a 1000D chess move to destroy the deep state. If everyone dies from COVID, then the deep state is defeated. The fact of the matter is, I have had conversations with people where I've pointed out inept things Trump has done, and they have explained that, no, that was a 4D chess move. He was playing 4D chess the whole time. He was a genius. No, you're just gullible. You're just really gullible. And because I'm not on Twitch, I can also call you a Trump simp. But Maybe we'll do a video. Maybe we'll do a segment talking about the issues going on over at Twitch right now. But is there anything else of note in here besides them showing the emails briefly and that?
And they did this despite the fact they kept denying they were pursuing the so-called herd immunity approach. It was always clear they were. Trump put Scott Atlas, a right-wing radiologist from a conservative think tank, in charge of the COVID response. And he did that.
Why would you put a radiologist in charge of your COVID response team? Why not a virologist? Why not an epidemiologist? Why not somebody whose actual education, actual, like, fucking professional career is based around viruses, based around the spread of these things? Why a radiologist? Why? That's like when somebody goes, I need a scientist to handle this. I need a scientist to handle this dating of this fossil. And so you go get somebody who doesn't know shit about radiometric dating because it's not their field, but they are an astronomer. They are a scientist. I can't tell you shit about what you're trying to do, though. That's... People work in specialized fields. Get the people specialized in those fields to respond to this shit.
Because he saw Atlas on TV when Atlas went on Trump's favorite TV shows and said things like the following, quote, "When you isolate everyone, including all the healthy people, you're prolonging the problem because you're preventing population immunity." See that word there?
So we're still a skeptic channel. We are going to point out, or at least I'm going to point out to you guys, yes, that is a thing that has been said, but I do not know the context of that quote. And I've dealt with enough quote mining from Creation Ministries International, Kent Hovind, etc., going along the lines. If somebody knows the full context of that quote, please let me know. But I will not jump on and just agree. Insofar as my issues are bringing a radiologist on for that instead of, an epidemiologist. But I don't know the context of that quote. I don't. So I'm going to go ahead and just let that part be there. Never let your skepticism, just go away because you agree with something innately. But he could be right. Just please keep your goggles on.
Immunity. Trump would later talk about the herd. Now, it was always apparent how reckless and dangerous the herd immunity strategy was, because the one place that openly tried it, in good faith, I think they thought it was the best way to do it, was Sweden. And it became clear pretty quickly it was a catastrophe. Sweden had a far, far higher death toll than its neighbors. The elderly, folks in long-term care facilities, particularly hard hit. And the Swedish government was then forced to abandon its failing strategy quite publicly and impose new restrictions.
Yep. But it looks like we're not going to get much more from this besides just pointing out the Trump administration failed. We know the Trump administration failed. We know that. If there's nothing more we're going to be able to glean from this besides the basic information, then there's no more that I need to show on here. If you guys want to watch the rest of the clip, then it's called We Want Them Infected by Chris Hayes, and it's on MSNBC's channel. If you need to see the rest of the context, go ahead. You can do so. That's where you'd find it. But I want to point out that it is, at the very least, for all the issues I have with Democrats, generally speaking, more of our Democratic officials seem to want to listen to scientists who actually, work in the appropriate fields during this. Again, this is a hasty generalization. Please take it with a grain of salt. But on the whole, at least the Democrats listen to science more. And I at least have to throw the bone there. That's about the most I can. TGene Vlogs points out, because of how they mutate, changing their coat proteins, 20% of common colds are corona-based. Molecular biologist here. Well, yeah. If you guys remember, there was a lot of... Especially, I saw some of this every now and again, when I was looking over Raz's shoulder when she was watching TikTok. I And I saw a lot of this just like on Facebook feeds where people would find aerosol sprays and go, look, it says it stops coronavirus. And like, well, yeah, it stops versions of corona. But the thing is that this is specifically, it is a novel virus. It is a different mutation of that virus. So yeah, these things can help with that, but it's not... There were people going on the conspiracy train of going, oh my god, look, this stops corona. They knew all along. Like, no, that's not what that means. That means that we have a cluster of viruses that function within that grouping. And this happens to be one of those, because it, like many other things, is a mutation. It is upsetting to me looking at a lot of this stuff, though, and again, I've said it before, I'll say it again, a lot of stuff is looking at it in hindsight. Sometimes there is stuff that people just did not know, but it is upsetting looking at this stuff and going, well, we did at least know basic shit. It's, in some cultures, it is not uncommon to wear a mask if you think you might be sick, or when you go out in public, when you think that there might be a risk of infection. It wasn't uncommon here during the Spanish flu. But yet there are people who brought up every reason in the fucking book to argue against that. The masks cut down your oxygen intake. You inhale too much carbon dioxide. It'll kill you. As if surgeons didn't wear masks. It's like throwing darts through a fence. Through a chain link fence. Yeah, if you ignore the fact that the darts would have to be cleaned onto a dartboard for the analogy to work. Every reason under the sun, down to the my body, my choice shit. Ignoring the fact that willingly infecting other people infringes on their bodies and their choices. Every reason under the sun not to socially distance. Not to do this. It's so childlike. Like Greg Locke had been doing this. We're going to do it to stick it to the Democrats. We're going to have all of our church together. They're going to be crammed into the pews because screw the left. How is it that people's spite is so strong that they're willing to kill people for it? It's the same shit that happens with healthcare. When somebody says they don't want their tax dollars going to helping an obese person or a smoker. Their spite for that individual is such that they're willing to let a 10-year-old child who needs healthcare, who can't afford it because she's a 10-year-old fucking child, their spite for the smoker is so high that they're willing to let the 10-year-old die. It's the same petty, childish nonsense. And I don't understand why adults, who I was told when I was a child didn't act like that, somehow never stepped out of the 3rd grade. I don't get it. Dialing back, this herd immunity strategy was a fucking stupid idea. Everyone that tried it, everybody that thought it was a good idea, was wrong. And it's not... In many cases, it's looking in hindsight, but in other cases, it's not. The herd immunity thing, while also taking adequate precautions, would have at least been better than just ignoring the fact that people are dying from a deadly virus. And I can't wait for that one person who's going to send a message in the comment section. Didn't you know? Rona's a hoax! Oh my god, dude. Go eat a stale bagel and try not to choke on the mold. Please.